Thank you for joining me today. We're going to be talking about a lot of different issues over the next couple of hours, so I hope you'll stay tuned. And this first one is a topic we've addressed before. You've certainly heard us address such issues as verbal abuse. I've done a week of radio programs on that. Domestic abuse, I've done programs on that as well. And we've even had guests in here talking about sexual abuse. And so this is an issue that we have been concerned about for some time here at Point of View. One of our more recent Outlook magazines looks at that in some detail, but I wanted to bring to you another ministry that you need to know about, and it's entitled Stronger Than Espresso. And the founder and president is with us, Dr. Brooke Jones. An individual holds a bachelor's degree in entrepreneurship, a master's in education, and a doctorate in theology, and really felt called to address this issue in light of some of her own personal experiences. So, Dr. Brooke Jones, great to have you in studio with us today.
Thanks, Kerby. Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Tell us your story, because it takes us back to, I think, 2006, if I remember right.
Yes, that's when the name Stronger Than Espresso was given to me in a God whisper, if you will, or a God boom. You know, we've had those moments where God gave us really that purpose. And he said to me, Stronger Than Espresso. And I didn't know at the time what that name meant, but I had come out of abusive relationships, domestic violence, not just one, but multiple relationships as a young adult, and then teen dating and violence, and even childhood abuse and sexual abuse. So it was a journey for me when I came out of that to begin to work on this other side, knowing that God was a part of the journey.
And lots of times what we have wanted to do is help individuals listening to this program know how to identify these problems in their marriage, in the church, in a business setting. But one of the things I know you are doing is actually putting together and have put together a curriculum, a Stronger Woman curriculum, to really address this issue. So let's talk about what is available, because I know that very quickly as people hear this, they're going to want to say, okay, where can I go? And the good news is if they click on your picture there, it will then take them to this website, which is easy to remember, actually, because it is entitled StrongerThanEspresso.com. Even if you don't know how to spell it or you even forget the name, it's all there at our website, pointofview.net. But talk about what is available to some of our listeners in terms of that.
Absolutely. Before I tell us now, let me take us back a little bit to the beginning. I remember I began writing the curriculum, which was really out of my own story, in 2006. And that's when God said to me, hey, Brooke, this is great that you've written this, but it's really about me. It's not about you. And from that point, for the next 6 years, I worked on with prayer, lots of prayer, lots of tears, and developed a curriculum that was for survivors of domestic violence. Now, it uses biblical scriptures as the part of healing, but also we developed a train the trainer model so that it wasn't just about us teaching the class. It was about us being able to teach others to teach. So in 2012, everything was ready. And I remember I began to knock on church doors at that time. And I said, I've got this great program for survivors of domestic violence. And you know what, Kerby? They said to me, we don't have that here. That's not a problem in our area. It's not a problem in our church. And the Lord had told me very clearly that I needed to get ready. Well, we continued to start teaching these classes in 2013. We've taught the classes. We train trainers. We have about 4 or 5 trainings a year. And let's fast forward to 2019. I will tell you that in 2012, they weren't ready. Churches, organizations, individuals in the community weren't really ready to talk about this issue, but they're ready now. And Stronger Women is a full program that is a curriculum. It's got Train the Trainer. We have all different kinds of resources, and someone can call us and they can start this program in their area, in their church, whether they live here in the Dallas area or whether they live anywhere across the nation.
Let's see if we can talk about why there was this hesitation because when we have talked about this, we say that, and I say this sometimes when I would teach at a seminary, like Dallas Seminary or Trinity or wherever it might be, or even sometimes a Bible college, just look out in front of your congregation there, look at the women there, and recognize that at least 1 in 4, some people say 1 in 3, but I'll just use the lowest number possible, 1 in 4 have in one way or another dealt with childhood sexual abuse, physical abuse, domestic abuse, verbal abuse, something like that. And that's eye-opening for a lot of pastors. And so that may explain why, first of all, pastors are the hardest thing to sell anything to, because, you know, we don't have any problems at our church, because I don't want to admit those, especially to the elder board. But more importantly, I just don't think that until recently they've been sensitized to how extensive this problem is.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Kerby, because 1 in 4 definitely is a statistic we know, but they say 1 in 3 because violence and abuse has its own cloud of shame, fear, judgment. And so there are many people who never will say a word to anyone. But what we do know is that people who have faith, regardless of their faith, if they have some sort of connection to a faith community, when they're in trouble, they're hurting, they're being hurt, their marriage is in trouble, they will often turn to their faith leader, their church, their pastor. And if they're not prepared to respond to them about the abuse in the appropriate way, then that individual can be either re-victimized, hurt worse, or then they can become into an unsafe situation. So I would say that over the last few years, there's become a lot of awareness to abuse. What we find is that it's such a secret. When I go into a restroom, anywhere I go, people are whispering in my ear, and they're talking to me more in the bathroom, and I never come out. Right.
Yeah. Well, and again, that's part of the issue is that there are a lot of individuals that don't know what to say. And how many times have we had somebody on this program or off air when they didn't have the microphones on say, when I told my pastor, his reaction was, oh, I just can't believe that, or not that person. And again, you don't want to immediately accept every accusation. But on the other hand, this sense that, oh, this couldn't possibly be actually happening is one of those issues that we've tried to train people that you really have a duty to report. And if somebody, some child or even a teenager or adult says this, take it seriously. And unfortunately, we're only now getting over that hump, aren't we?
Absolutely. I think that what we find about people who abuse other people, and that is in romantic relationships, platonic relationships, abusers have very specific characteristics. They use fear, force, or manipulation, okay, to keep it simple. So what happens is an abusive person does not look like an abuser to the general public.
No.
They're very charismatic. They're well-liked. They're the top leader at the job or in the community, and even, unfortunately, at the church. So when someone has the courage to come forward, they are often not believed, discredited, and then they hide a little bit deeper into their shame. One of the things that we just started doing this summer is we developed a very extensive toolkit. It's designed for faith leaders. It's best practices for responding to domestic violence so that we can share with faith leaders so they can be better prepared.
We're going to take a break, and we have a lot more to talk about with Dr. Brooke Jones. And again, if you would like to know more, StrongerThanEspresso.com, empowering survivors, equipping leaders, and transforming trauma through the art of healing. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
As I mentioned earlier this week, the Democratic presidential candidates disagree on a number of key issues, but there is one issue where there is unanimity. All of these Democrats want you to pay for abortions. That is the argument Alexander DeSantis makes in a recent column. There may be some disagreement among the candidates about whether to implement Medicare for all. There's even some disagreement about which plans actually qualify as Medicare for all. But all of these plans being put forward assume that the federal government should cover abortion. She says even as Democratic candidates try to distinguish themselves on health care, all of them who have opined on the topic support a national health care program that would finance every woman's abortion at any stage of pregnancy and for any reason. American voters should pay attention to that last point. These candidates want abortion legal from conception to pregnancy for any reason or no reason at all. I sometimes have a caller to my radio program arguing that we should find a middle ground and establish a common sense compromise on abortion. Of course, if you believe that there is human life in the womb, you can't really compromise on that. But even so, let me ask you, where is the middle ground? If you believe abortion should be legal for all 9 months, and you believe that all American taxpayers should pay for it, where is the potential for compromise? Before I close, let me explain one issue. Rarely do these candidates or these plans use the word abortion. Instead, they talk about comprehensive reproductive care or how their plan will guarantee a woman's right to choose. I think we all know what that means and how judges and bureaucrats will interpret such language in the law. It means fully funded abortions that you will have to pay for. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Affirm Films and the Kendrick Brothers, Overcomer, starring Alex Kendrick and Priscilla Shire, rated PG, in theaters August 23rd. Overcomermovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention that there's some really great resources. I'm holding up one of those here for Stronger Than Espresso and a variety of other resources that you can find. Of course, you can also go to the website, strongerthanespresso.com. And Dr. Brooke Jones with us as we're talking about this organization. And I thought we, for just a few minutes, might talk about these programs, because as I go to your website, Stronger Women, Stronger Teens, Stronger Parents, I think a lot of people would say, you know, I'd really like to sign up for this, or I know somebody would like to sign up for this. What am I getting myself into?
Right. That's a great question. So when someone comes to a Stronger Women class, it's a class that is designed for women survivors of domestic violence. They can be a woman who had domestic violence fairly recently, or it could have been decades ago. When they come, they'll find other women that are very much like them. They will work on healing their own self-esteem. They'll learn about setting healthy boundaries. They'll learn about their own coping mechanisms and the behaviors. A lot of times abuse causes us to not only feel certain things about ourselves, but even when the abuse is over and it's in our past decades ago, we still are reacting in the same way. And Stronger Women helps them begin to learn and put into practice new ways that they can respond. It also helps them really redefine their life, and it's very focused on them building their relationship with Christ that is directly their own. And what we found is, as we've collected data this last year, 97% of our graduates told us that they received better skills for parenting and family.
I believe that.
Okay, so what's interesting, Kerby, is we don't actually teach parenting skills, right? But what we do teach is someone to believe they have value. They have better communication. They can have better and healthier relationships, which is translating to moms that are better parents and can have better families moving forward. And so what a church can do is they can take the curriculum, they can have some individuals become certified to be facilitators and run the Stronger Women program alongside their Bible studies for women or in their life recovery ministries. Different churches have different names for those types of programs, but it's easy. It can be run in a 4, 6, 8, or even a 15-week program set. And we have all of the training, videos, syllabus. We have everything because we've been doing this since 2013.
Well, and again, it's a kind of turnkey. I'm just thinking that a
Yes.
typical pastor says, oh, do I need one more program? No, you already probably have a recovery program or something like that already.
Yes.
So that is the case. And the extent of some of the hurt, help me if I'm maybe overreacting, but I meet some of these young women that have been through so much trauma. It's almost like PTSD. It almost feels like the same kind of conversations I've had with them that I've had with individuals returning back from a war theater. Is that fair?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that recently there's been studies that really verify that someone who has been abused and faced that ongoing trauma within their own home, they have the same characteristics, the same really medical responses as someone with PTSD. Even in my own experience, Kerby, I found that there was a year I could not work. I was devastated. Everything about who I was in the past was completely destroyed. And I think that's the challenge that you have when you survive from abuse, because the person who is supposed to love you, cherish you, take the deepest care of you is the person that is hurting you and wounding you the most. When your home is not a safe place to be, and that's an ongoing fear, that is at the core of a person. And I think that this is such an important area for church leaders or those that are working within our faith communities, because when we tell someone, God loves you, God, he died for you and he thinks you have great value. And if you're a survivor of abuse, that's really hard to understand. They're just words. They're not something that I can take and own because I've got a fragmented part of me that needs to go through a healing process. And then I can truly find the love that God has right before me.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. But also, I'm going to give you the opportunity to just kind of sit back and listen. But let's talk about some of the things that are on your website. We've got the various programs, some of the events. And what I thought was so interesting is there's a media kit, there's professional training. So talk about all the different ways that a listener right now can connect up with some of the things that you're doing.
Yes, absolutely. So we've already talked about the Stronger Women program. And from that, we began to branch out into two other of the programs that are on our site. You'll see an art workshops and art healing. Several years ago, we began to realize that including art within our curriculum was a very important way to help have people heal. In addition, we do standalone art workshops, whether it's for individuals, for groups of people, or for even staff members that need self-care. So if someone wants to learn more about an art workshop, the other piece is Stronger Teens. The biggest request we got from our moms said, help my teenager. They're already in an abusive relationship. 1 in 3 teens are already facing. So we started doing interactive workshops, healthy relationship workshops for parents and teens, boys and girls together. And we also built a toolkit, how to talk to your teens about healthy relationships. So if you're interested in bringing us into your youth group or your group where there's kids and parents, we would be eager to do training. I also mentioned earlier about our best practices workshop. We just completed another toolkit. We love to make resources that we can share. If you're a pastor, an organization, a group that wants to be trained on best practices responding to domestic violence, call us in. We'll be happy to host an interactive professional training, and everyone who attends can take away our toolkit, which is a guide that you can use moving forward.
And again, for our listeners, you can go to the website, strongerthanespresso.com. But a lot of our listeners right this hour tend to be in the Dallas area.
Yes.
So let's point out where you are located, because you're actually at the Hope Center. So individuals that say, I'd like to meet you and Stephanie and some of the other people on staff, they can meet you there. It'd be better to call before they show up. But talk about that, because that's been a great resource for you right there in the Hope Center.
Oh, the Hope Center has been such a wonderful blessing for us this year. So we were on the wait list for 6 years, and we were waiting to get in. And this year, June 1st, we became a tenant at the Hope Center. It's allowed us to have synergy. It's allowed us to have better opportunities to meet people, to have bigger trainings. And we're very excited. So if anybody out there wants to come and meet us face to face, come see the Hope Center, have lunch with us or coffee, definitely espresso, come meet us.
Let's see if we can, just real quickly. Some people might be saying, okay, I'm ready to sign up. What do I do? Do I call you? Do I go to the website? Do I have to fill something out? Do I have to have a background check? All sorts of questions going through people's minds.
Sure. So first of all, we find that Stronger Than Espresso can be difficult for people to spell or even remember. Yes. We also have a website called stronger123.com.
Perfect.
So if you can remember stronger123.com, you can come there and it has some basic information as well as a contact form. And then you can send us the contact form and we will reach out to you. We have our phone number, which is 469-307-8488. You can call us and reach out to us. There are ways that people can get involved. They can become a certified facilitator. They can engage with us by hosting a workshop for us. They can also become a volunteer, or they can serve on our board or advisory council. We welcome a lot of different ways because this is an area that truthfully, Kerby, we all know someone.
We do. And like I say, the times where I'm in front of a pastor or future pastor, seminary student, look out in front of that congregation. Anywhere from 1/4 to 1/3 of those women have, in one way or another, been dealing with the very thing we're talking about right now.
Absolutely.
And it's one of those untapped resources that I appreciate you tapping into. Let me just mention that we have a link to your website. We also have your Twitter feed and your Facebook posts, so people can find you in a lot of different ways. But one more time, if somebody wants to call you, let's give that number one more time.
It's 469-307-8488. And then they can also go to the website, stronger123.com.
And, of course, we also have Stronger Than Espresso there.
That's
so you can
right.
use either
Absolutely.
way. And you will find there's the healing program, Stronger Women, Stronger Teens, Stronger Parents. You have all sorts of events coming up here, how you can help, as well as information about Brooke. And it is just a delight to have you in here. I'm sure this will not be the only time we'll have you in the program. And I'd love to do maybe a roundtable a little bit later, maybe this year or next year, to even talk about this issue of abuse, because it's a big issue in the Christian church right now. And maybe get you and Mary DeMuth and a few others that write about this, maybe June Hunt, and see if we can do a roundtable and talk about all these kinds of things.
It'd be my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, I hope this educated you. And those of you that are hearing this right now might say, oh, this is something I need. Or you may be saying, no, I don't need it, but I do know somebody that does. So take the time to pass this on to them. We have an opportunity for you to actually download the podcast and send it. Or, of course, it'll also be on our YouTube channel. You can send that to them and encourage them to get involved. We're going to take a break. We have a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after this.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our teams stand strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Did want to educate you a little bit about this new ministry. Not so new, I guess, but certainly new to most of us listening. Stronger Than Espresso, a nonprofit organization really reaching out to survivors of abuse. And so Dr. Brooke Jones with us, and we probably have her on again to do some roundtable discussion about this issue of abuse, which is a chronic and acute problem simultaneously in the church and outside the church. So we will continue that conversation in the future. Let me just mention as a program note that in about a half an hour, we're going to have Michael Farris with us. He is the president and CEO, general counsel for the Alliance Defending Freedom, a good friend who was actually the founding president of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, even of Patrick Henry College. But we're going to be talking about this case before the Supreme Court. ADF has had a lot of cases before the Supreme Court. This one is going to address the issue of homosexuality and especially transgenderism, whether or not you could redefine some of these terms that were actually part of the law and say that sex now means sexual orientation and means transgenderism. So this is a case before the Supreme Court with major consequences. So we'll be talking about that with him. And so that will be something that we'll be talking about in about a half an hour. And I might just as also a program note mention that this time tomorrow, I'm going to take us through this whole question of alleged contradictions in the Bible. This is something that we've talked about briefly with some other guests, and a long time ago, I believe I did a program on that, but this will be really an attempt to answer the question that came from this Hillsong leader, but other individuals as well who say, well, aren't there contradictions in the Bible? So let's take on some of the most difficult ones. They sort of fall out in one of 5 categories. So I'll try to, over that 1 hour period tomorrow, before we get into our weekend edition, to address that issue and then make that available to you if you would like to follow it. There will be some slides that go with it and everything, just to see if I could at least try to answer some of your questions. And the biggest problem I always have when somebody says there are contradictions in the Bible is even after you address what I think are the most, if you will, perennial ones, the ones that are most frequently cited or the ones that are considered to be the most difficult, those who are skeptical still say, yeah, okay, you answer those, but what about all the others? It's like, okay, I mean, if I answer the toughest questions, the ones that seem most difficult to resolve, wouldn't it make sense that if you give me enough time and I had enough patience, which I don't, to go through hundreds of those? As a matter of fact, there is an article I'm thinking about posting tomorrow, which was actually, I think, the 100 contradictions in the Bible that somebody took the time to answer. And as I look on the list, I think most of those are pretty simple, actually. I mean, some of them are, well, this was said here in the Old Testament, or this person was listed as the king. And I'm like, that's not really that big a deal. I'm talking about ones that look like true contradictions or problems in which the Bible says something and archaeology provides no basis for that, although now it does. And that's the good news. We in the 21st century are just incredibly blessed to have so much archaeological confirmation about many issues that were significantly challenged back, say, in the 19th century, even the 18th century during the Enlightenment. But we'll get into all that tomorrow. Just wanted to give you that update if I could. And while we're giving you an update, before I get into some of the articles we've posted on the website, let me just mention that my article today, my Viewpoints commentary today, is on the Green New Deal, the cost of the Green New Deal, because you have a lot of members of Congress that are saying this is what we need in order to address climate change. Now, of course, you have to also recognize that even if you could implement all of this, there are people who are very significant environmentalists who believe that we do have a problem, who still acknowledge that this is not going to be resolved by trying to completely decarbonize America in 10 years. Because if you really want to completely decarbonize the American economy, that means you eliminate oil, gas, coal, even burning wood would really be in that category. And first of all, it would be very expensive. I think it's completely impossible, and it would be terribly complex. But the article that I have today just takes one of those issues on, and that's expensive. And that is research done by the Competitive Enterprise Institute that shows that if indeed you did implement the various elements in the Green New Deal, it would cost the average American household at least $70,000, some up to as high as $100,000 in the first year. And so, put in a simple way, Dr. Merrill Matthews the other day just kind of cut to the chase and said, in other words, it would cost more than the average income of the average family. And so, where's that money coming from? Well, I think we all know it isn't going to be spent because we simply don't have that much money to spend on it. And so those are some, I think, very significant aspects of that. And so if you'd like to read that commentary, it is on the website today. And if you would like to subscribe so that you have my commentary showing up in your inbox Monday through Friday, that is the case. Penna Dexter, who'll be with us tomorrow, actually her commentary she writes once a week will show up in your inbox on Saturday. So that's what we make available to you. Let me, just before I take a break, talk about one story which I guess I was surprised to find out wasn't really covered by the mainstream media. It's the first article I've posted here, and that is the attacks that have been taking place against ICE. And again, ICE stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. There are a couple, but I'll just talk about, since we're in the state of Texas, primarily, most of our listeners in Texas, although, again, I acknowledge some of you in Nevada and Minnesota and a few other places that might be hearing this program. Let's use the attack that took place in San Antonio. In San Antonio, 2 different ICE facilities were fired upon. The attacks took place in early morning hours. The FBI is fairly certain that this was a targeted attack only on the floors where the ICE offices were struck. This comes from the News 4 San Antonio story, in which they said, quote, investigators say that multiple shots were fired on 2 floors targeting ICE officials. No one was hit, but windows were broken in the building. One person was injured. It's not clear how they were, though. I don't know the update on that story myself. Then the FBI special agent went on to say, I don't think there's a question that they knew which floors were the ICE offices. The buildings shot at had multiple tenants with the ICE facilities located on upper floors. The FBI agent said all of the shots that we found are on the floors where ICE has offices. There's no question a very targeted attack. It's not a secret facility. You can go online. It's out there. So they did some research. They knew what floors ICE was on. They knew the buildings where they were and where to actually hit them. Then a little bit later, the ICE field officer, the director of the field office, I should say, said that the national discourse surrounding ICE and the topic of immigration, he says, is reckless. Blamed today's shootings, which of course happened yesterday, on politicians, media, and activists. He went on to say this attack on the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement removal operations field office in San Antonio is completely without justification. Political rhetoric and misinformation that various politicians, media outlets, and activist groups recklessly disseminate to the American people regarding the ICE mission only serve to further encourage these violent acts. ICE officers put their lives on the line each and every day to keep our communities safe. This disturbing public discourse shrouds our critical law enforcement function and unnecessarily puts our officers' safety at risk. I haven't taken the time to check every website, but I've heard people say that some of these shots which went into the ICE offices were not even reported by a number of different media outlets. And so, again, you can imagine if one of those bullets went through the window of Planned Parenthood, the window of Bernie Sanders' election office, or something of that nature, how that would be probably front page news and probably could be the lead story. The fact that it was not covered, I think, says something that we should address as well. And so that is just a little bit of an update on a shooting that I was aware of, but I actually first heard about it on talk radio and did not see it in the news. Maybe some news outlets have covered it since then, but I just thought if you haven't heard about it, we thought we might talk about it here today on Point of View. Just when we come back, let me address a couple of issues. My commentary yesterday was on the subject of paying for abortion. And so I thought for just a minute I would talk about the fact that the Democrats, number one, want to actually implement Medicare for all and what that might mean. And more importantly, Bernie Sanders has made it very clear that he recognizes Medicare for all would probably destroy hospitals. So he's also calling for a bailout after he bankrupts them. We'll talk about this right after these messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
A couple of quick points, and then we're going to spend some time talking with Michael Farris. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation we'll have with him for about a half an hour. He, again, is the President, CEO, and General Counsel of Alliance Defending Freedom. We're going to be talking about another one of these really foundational cases, which I hope is ruled in the right way. I can't imagine, given the construction of the court now, that they're going to allow this to continue on, and I'll get into the details of what that might mean. But basically what you have had is first under the Obama administration and then under the courts, the argument that when back in the 1970s, if you want to get specific about some of these laws, when it prevents sex discrimination, that sex can be now redefined, meaning sexual orientation, including transgenderism. And the case has to do with an individual, a man, who decided he was a woman and started showing up at a funeral home in a woman's dress, violating the principles that were set forth by the funeral home. And so we'll see where that takes us. But again, we'll talk about that with him in just a minute. But as I mentioned just a minute ago, my commentary today has to do with the Green New Deal. My commentary yesterday had to do with paying for abortions, because one of the things that I have noticed is that even though there is a real division right now among the Democratic presidential candidates, some like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, are really full on in terms of promoting the idea of Medicare for all. Others are holding back and having kind of a variation of that, Kamala Harris. And then others, like the former Vice President Joe Biden, really say, let's just take Obamacare and improve it. So there's real disagreement about what to do in terms of health care and whether or not to implement Medicare for all, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. But there is one place where there is complete unanimity, and that is every single one of them, in one way or another, if you look at their proposals, expect you to pay for abortion. Now, as I point out in the commentary, they don't use the word abortion that often. They talk about comprehensive reproductive care, or they talk about guaranteeing a woman's right to choose. Well, you know what that means. And of course, if indeed everything in the government is being covered, you can see how they would obviously believe that abortion should be covered. And so this is something else that I think is going to strike some individuals if they have even a little bit of fairness. If you're really one of those sort of pro-choice people out there in the listening audience, you say, look, I think abortion should be allowed. I wouldn't have an abortion. I wouldn't have my wife have an abortion, my sister, my girlfriend, whatever. But if someone else feels that they should, that's their choice. But I don't think, even though I believe that that should be available, that somebody else who's pro-life and has strong moral objections to that should be forced to pay for that. And, of course, we'll see where that goes in terms of the future. Which brings me to another aspect of Medicare for all. Our friends at the Wall Street Journal today simply wanted to bring to your attention another issue, and that is anybody that looks at this Medicare for all proposal by Bernie Sanders and by Elizabeth Warren and by many others that have signed on to it recognize that it's eventually going to bankrupt hospitals, because hospitals cannot received reduced funding like they would be receiving for all patients. They receive reduced funding for Medicare or sometimes Medicaid, but they just couldn't probably survive. So the editors put it this way: usually politicians pass a bailout to clean up a mess they've created in the past, but Bernie Sanders is now promising cash up front. Witness the Democrat Socialist offering to actually help hospitals he'd bankrupt with his Medicare for all. Last month, apparently, Bernie Sanders suggested a $20 billion, that's $20 billion, it's a lot of money here, folks, a federal bailout fund for struggling hospitals. He announced this plan in Philadelphia, where the city's hospital is in bankruptcy proceedings. He spins the failure of the hospital as a tale of corporate greed perpetuated by a private equity firm. Yet one underappreciated reality is nearly 2/3 of the patients in that hospital either are on Medicare or Medicaid, a fact noted in a letter to the Department of Health and Human Services from members of the Pennsylvania delegation in Congress. This detail is significant because Medicare and Medicaid are notorious for paying hospitals less than what it costs to provide those services. So the best estimates are that Medicaid and Medicare pay hospitals on an average of 87% to 90% of the actual cost. I've seen numbers as low as 80%, but who's going to quibble there? Hospitals then shift cost onto private insurers, which tend to pay more than 140% of the cost, according to that. So here, if you're losing money every time you have a Medicare or Medicaid patient, the only way you can make it up is to overcharge you and me if we're not on Medicare and Medicaid. And so that's the way the game is played. Well, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services reported earlier this year that more than 2/3 of hospitals are losing money on Medicare inpatient services. That's a direct quote from them, by the way, so we're not making this up. This is a direct quote from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, all of which bears directly on Medicare for All, endorsed by Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and others. The point of Medicare for All is to eliminate private insurance and reimburse hospitals for all services at Medicare rates. Bernie Sanders talks about efficiencies from less paperwork or administrative burdens, but the real savings of Medicare for All would come from paying doctors and hospitals less than it cost to treat the patients. The Journal of the American Medical Association this year published estimates of what Medicare rates would mean: $151 billion a year in lost revenue for community hospitals. They went on to say hospitals currently operating at costs substantially above Medicare payment rates may have limited ability to reduce their cost quickly. Enter, of course, Bernie Sanders' suggested bailout, which tries to solve the practical and political problem of bankrupting hospitals. Former Congressman John Delaney, remember him on the debates there? In June, in the debate, scored a direct hit on Bernie Care when he noted, quote, "If you go to every hospital in this country and ask them one question, which is, how would it have been for you last year if every one of your bills were paid at the Medicare rate?" Every single hospital administrator said they would close. So again, the hospital bailout plan that Bernie Sanders is proposing, according to the editors at the Wall Street Journal, is a tacit admission that Mr. Delaney, that is former Congressman John Delaney, is right. It's also one more reminder that Medicare for All isn't about universal coverage so much as it is a federal takeover of American medical care. That comes from our friends at the Wall Street Journal today. They've pulled together the facts and figures, and I'm thinking I might do a commentary on this because it just illustrates again that when you are even putting together a bailout fund, in some respects you're admitting that, yes, once we implement this, we're going to have to bail out the hospitals because if I don't, they're going to go broke. So we'll see where that takes us. When we come back, we'll get into this very contentious issue. What does sex mean in the law? Does it mean sexual orientation? Does it mean transgender? Does it mean that you could never have a rule that says if you're a man, you have to wear male clothing? A female has to wear female clothing, even if you're in a funeral parlor? And so we'll find out how that takes that particular conversation and what the Supreme Court may or may not do in that regard. It also relates to, of course, our action item for you, the Equality Act, which has passed the House, is now in front of the Senate. So if you have some convictions about sexual orientation and transgenderism, there's a way to let your two members of Congress know about this in the Senate. So we'll come back and talk about all of this right after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. We're going to spend some time talking about a case going to the Supreme Court, but the bigger issue is, does a federal agency, do the courts have the authority to rewrite a federal statute? I think you would obviously say no, but that has happened before. And of course, there is an attempt to try to rewrite those statutes through what's called the Equality Act. So our action item for you today, which is already on our website, is to address that issue of the Equality Act, which is passed the House and is now in front of the United States Senate. But first, we want to focus on this particular case, which is a troubling one, to put it mildly. And it is, of course, one of those that will be helpful in terms of resolving this question that certainly should already be resolved. And so to help us understand the case that will go before the court and the various issues associated with it, we bring Michael Farris back to the microphone. He is the president, CEO, general counsel of Alliance Defending Freedom. You know him, of course, as the founding president of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, also the founder of Patrick Henry College, individual who is the author of over 15 books with degrees from Gonzaga University, University of London, and joins us now by phone. Mike Farris, it is always great to have you on the program.
Hi, Kerby. It is really good to be with you again.
Let's, if we can, get into this particular issue, and it really involves a case involving really a funeral home. And I guess for just a few minutes, why don't I just let you kind of tell the background to that, because it is troubling at its very core, but it also brings us back to whether or not federal agencies or even courts can rewrite a statute. But tell us where this case originated from in the state of Michigan.
Sure. Tom Harris is the owner, fifth-generation owner, it's been in his family a long time, of a funeral home. Actually, there's a cluster of funeral homes that they own. And they had a longtime male employee who wrote a letter and told his boss that he was going to start dressing as a woman at work. And the boss thought it over for a couple of weeks and sought counsel and realized that, among many other problems, this person is going to focus attention on themselves in a way that would be detrimental to his ability to work with families in grief. That the whole point of the dress code in the funeral home industry is to take attention away from the employee and comfort the family. And this would just be wrong on several levels, that being one of them. And so he told him, no, you can't do that. You can do what you want on your own time, but here you've got to dress in the regulation suit. And so he was terminated because he refused to do that, and that's not against the law in Michigan. Michigan has no law on sexual orientation or gender identity, and it's not against the federal law. At least that's what that was the situation when he did this, because the federal law simply bans discrimination on the basis of sex, a term passed in 1964 in the Civil Rights Act, and everybody understands it meant men and women. And so the Equal Opportunity Commission under President Obama used this case to try to change the law of the country, to try to change the meaning of sex into this whole notion of sexual orientation and gender identity. And that's what the fight's about. We lost the case at the first two levels. At the first level we won at the trial court, and then the Court of Appeals reversed, and now we're going to the U.S. Supreme Court to try to get a victory again, as we did in the first level.
Well, again, back to this key case, as you said, it's EEOC, it's what was under the Obama administration, the Sixth Circuit Court, and those kinds of things. But I would think that for people that believed in interpreting a constitution, this is not an issue. But even for our friends that sometimes believe in a living constitution, you're really a little far afield to suggest that when they talk about sex in the 1960s or even the early 1970s, because you've got a couple of different rulings, that sex meant anything other than gender, what we would call today male or female, and to then write into that and reinterpret it to say, no, sex means sexual orientation, homosexuality, transgenderism. I would think that would be a hard kind of case to make even there, given the fact that if indeed you are convinced that we need to change the law, well, then go to Congress, as they're trying to do right now, and change the law. But don't tell me that sex back in 1964 or 1972 or whenever you want to pick a particular statute, that made sexual orientation. True?
True, but you're applying something that the other side, the ACLU is on the other side as usual. They don't take into account. People like you and I, both whether it's the Constitution or a statute, we ask the question, what do these words mean?
Right.
What did they mean at the time they were written? The ACLU and some judges take the position that what should these words mean? According to our philosophy. And when you buy into the philosophy, what should these words mean, whether you're interpreting the statute or the Constitution, we've given up the rule of law. And we've simply made judges into super philosopher kings who can do whatever they want.
And one of the things I've said, even in my little booklet here on constitutional interpretation, don't claim to be a lawyer or anything, but I use the illustration that if you were to write a will and then to actually die, and then somebody, as they're reading the will, say, well, that's not what they meant, this is what it should mean, you would be horrified that somebody would take your words in your will and manipulate them. But here, that's exactly what sort of is done on a regular basis. So I want to take a break, and when we come back, I want to talk for a few more minutes about this case, because it is a good example of why we really bring to you today this whole question of whether or not a federal court or whether or not a federal agency can even rewrite the federal statute. And it also brings us to the article that we have posted today, and it's also under our Take Action item. If you go to the website, pointofview.net, you will see that we have the Equality Act, which is an attempt to rewrite some of those statutes in such a way that has already passed the House of Representatives and now is in front of the Senate. And so this is an opportunity for you to let your two United States senators know how you feel about that issue. And as we'll talk about when we come back with Michael Farris, this is a good example of how this legislation could, as I've said in this particular piece here, could take a wrecking ball to religious freedom and to religious liberty. And I want to maybe reflect on two of the other cases that the Alliance Defending Freedom addressed in the past on this issue of religious liberty as well as abortion, and just a good illustration why it's so important that you support these organizations that are standing up for your freedom, your religious freedom, and for some of these important actions items that we're going to bring to you today. So as you listen, I hope that you will also take some action and go to our website, which says Take Action, the Equality Act in the Senate, and express your opinion to your two elected U.S. senators. When we come back, though, we're going to talk a little bit more with Michael Farris about what this means, and then we'll get into some other issues in the news. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
As I mentioned earlier this week, the Democratic presidential candidates disagree on a number of key issues, but there is one issue where there is unanimity. All of these Democrats want you to pay for abortions. That is the argument Alexander DeSantis makes in a recent column. There may be some disagreement among the candidates about whether to implement Medicare for all. There's even some disagreement about which plans actually qualify as Medicare for all. But all of these plans being put forward assume that the federal government should cover abortion. She says even as Democratic candidates try to distinguish themselves on health care, all of them who have opined on the topic support a national health care program that would finance every woman's abortion at any stage of pregnancy and for any reason. American voters should pay attention to that last point. These candidates want abortion legal from conception to pregnancy for any reason or no reason at all. I sometimes have a caller to my radio program arguing that we should find a middle ground and establish a common sense compromise on abortion. Of course, if you believe that there is human life in the womb, you can't really compromise on that. But even so, let me ask you, where is the middle ground? If you believe abortion should be legal for all 9 months, and you believe that all American taxpayers should pay for it, where is the potential for compromise? Before I close, let me explain one issue. Rarely do these candidates or these plans use the word abortion. Instead, they talk about comprehensive reproductive care or how their plan will guarantee a woman's right to choose. I think we all know what that means and how judges and bureaucrats will interpret such language in the law. It means fully funded abortions that you will have to pay for. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Affirm Films and the Kendrick Brothers, Overcomer, starring Alex Kendrick and Priscilla Shire, rated PG, in theaters August 23rd. Overcomermovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Michael Farris with us for a few more minutes. Again, CEO and General Counsel of Alliance Defending Freedom. We have a link to ADF, which is adflegal.org. It's also on our website here. And we really do believe that you should support this organization because of its stand for religious liberty and many other issues. And Michael, I thought we might talk about that for just a minute. Last year, of course, we spent some time talking with you about two different Supreme Court cases that ADF had. First of all, two cases before the Supreme Court in the same year, not recommended for the faint-hearted. I know that created an enormous amount of work for those of you and the legal profession. But it also connects with this one in the sense that a lot of these cases are really the kind of the homosexuality, sexual orientation, transgender issues threatening religious liberty. And you are well aware of how if these decisions went the other way, it would essentially bulldoze down or eviscerate or completely eliminate religious freedom, wouldn't it?
Indeed. Both the cases that we argued a year ago were well known. One of them very well known, the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. We represented Jack Phillips. And, of course, the Supreme Court ruled that Colorado's efforts to force him to create a same-sex wedding cake amounted to religious bigotry because he had the ability to follow his faith. And so it was a very good decision for us. We'd argued it on both free speech grounds and religious freedom grounds, and they found that the bigotry in question was a violation of religious freedom. The second case was a free speech one involving the right to life issue, where the progressive movement that owns the California legislature, in a metaphorical sense, they got the legislature to pass a bill requiring pro-life pregnancy centers to post an advertisement for free abortions on the walls of the pro-life centers. I argued that one myself in the Supreme Court, and we were able to win that one as well. And the principle that we can't coerce people to participate. You can't coerce them to participate in same-sex weddings. You can't force them to promote abortions. And the case we have now in Michigan is, do we have to participate in our own businesses in promoting this whole transgender ideology? And, ultimately, not only has Congress not passed the law, we think Congress should not pass a law to do this, because it creates so many problems for people, and not the least of which is violating people's faith. You have to start addressing people by pronouns other than their biological gender. We are now participating in these kinds of things, and so it's coerced participation. They want us to be forced to participate in the kinds of things that God just simply says, no, that's sinful behavior. And it's one thing for people to do that on their own, but when we have to participate, that's a problem.
And one of the things I want to encourage people to do is, of course, Michael, you know how we really try to mobilize people to take some action. And there are two action items, one on our website, which I'll talk more about a little bit later, but that is to let your 2 U.S. senators know how you feel on this issue, because as I point out, I think this is a way, if indeed the Equality Act did pass the Senate, it would take a wrecking ball or bulldoze down your religious freedom. But also, we have a link to your website, which I would encourage people to go to as well, because one of the things that you are encouraging people to do is say, I really stand for these issues, and there is a way in which they can kind of join with you to say, we first of all actually believe that an individual should have his or her right to run their business and live their lives according to their faith. We recognize that the American government should protect those freedoms, and that's really what you have been involved with in every one of these cases before the Supreme Court, that we're not asking for any kind of special rights. We're just asking the freedom to live and let live. If you want to do what you do on your business, fine, but don't force me to draw a picture, photograph a particular wedding, or to make cakes or flowers or whatever that you determine I have to make. Instead, you can have the freedom to decide whether you want to use me or not. But we can't allow individuals to then, because of the so-called LGBTQ agenda, force you to do things that would actually violate your conscience and even your artistic ability.
Well, that's exactly right. And I appreciate you encouraging people to join with ADF. The ACLU membership growth has been incredible in the last few years. They're so intent on taking down this administration and anything to do with conservatism. And case after case, we are faced against the ACLU in the courtroom. Masterpiece Cake Shop case last year, the Harris Funeral Home case this year. We're consistently fighting against them. And the real question is, are there as many Christians who believe that we should be doing the kind of things that ADF is doing compared to the number of leftists who support the ACLU? And their number of members just dwarfs ours. They have millions. We have about 150,000 people that support us. We need to match the ACLU so that we can do a better job of defending Christian freedoms.
Well, let's step up and see what we can do to help ADF. First of all, we always encourage people to pray. Can you kind of give us a sense of what is the next couple of steps on this so people know what the prayer targets are, and then how can they support you financially?
Well, the prayer targets are the Harris Funeral Home case will be argued in the Supreme Court on October 8th. So praying for that is very important. We have two other cases that are similar that are headed to the court. Barronelle Stutzman, the Christian florist from Washington State, her petition to the Supreme Court to have her case heard will be this fall as well. So I'd encourage people to pray for Barronelle's case as well. The way they can get involved with us financially, just go to our website and click on the links, and we would really encourage people to support us, become members with us, and we will continue to fight the fight for religious freedom, for the right to life, for family values across this country and around the world.
And I might just mention that, of course, when you go to adflegal.org, you don't even have to remember all that because we have a link there. You can obviously find out about the case of the Harris Funeral Homes. There's some other ones as well. For example, you have the whole question about these high school track athletes that are right now having to compete against men who call themselves girls, or boys that call themselves girls, or young women. And so that's a big issue. And then a variety of other cases that you're involved with. So when they support you, they're supporting a variety of different ones. But it is amazing to me how many times they all come back to the LGBTQ agenda, don't they?
Between the abortion agenda and the LGBTQ agenda, that takes up the vast majority of our time.
And so, again, just an illustration of what you're supporting with them. Yeah. So, Michael, first of all, I'd love to get you back here on October after those oral arguments. We'll see where that goes. Any estimate right now? It seems to me that you have at least 5 members of the Supreme Court right now that say if that was the definition of the word sex back in the 1960s, that should be the definition now. So you would hope that you would have another victory, but you can't be complacent at all, and I certainly encourage our listeners to be praying for you.
Indeed. We think we have a good shot, but there's no guarantee of anything. So
it certainly isn't.
Is very important.
Well, again, this is one of the reasons why you need to support this organization, Alliance Defending Freedom. And Michael Farris, it's always great to have you on the program. So look forward to the next opportunity.
Thank you, Kerby.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we will get into a couple of other issues in the news. We have posted a couple of those, an attack on an ICE facility. We also, of course, have this case before the Supreme Court. We have a couple others we're going to get to a little bit later related to the issue of immigration. There's just a lot of things we're going to cover today. But let me also, in light of not only encouraging you to maybe sign up with ADF, to go to our website right now, pointofview.net. In the middle section, you will see it says Take Action. The Equality Act has already passed the House of Representatives, and so we wanted to give you an opportunity now to contact your 2 U.S. senators. We all aware of the fact that we broadcast in more than 40 different states. Some of you live in states where it's pretty obvious that your senator would disagree with you on this issue, but it's still worth letting those senators know. And so I would hope that all of you would take the time, because we make it very easy for you to simply put your name and address in there. If you've done this before, it will actually surface all that information. It will give you the information that you need to send this email on to your 2 senators. And so many people have said, I have never been real good about contacting my members of Congress, but you've made it really easy at Point of View. So that's your action item for today. Go to the Take Action button and click on Take Action, fill it out, send it off, and when we come back, we're going to get into some other very important issues. We've got a lot to cover, and we will do so right after this.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our team stands strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just give you a program note. In the next hour, we're going to be talking with our friend John Zmirak. He actually has written a very good piece, 9 Things Jesus Might Do About Immigration. It's actually written by John Zmirak, who will be on the program, and Kelly Kohlberg, who's been on the program with us before. What they're doing is kind of responding to a previous article that appeared by Esther Cepeda and Michael Gerson. What would Jesus do about immigration issues? This, of course, surfaced because people say, well, here's what the Bible says about immigration. Well, again, I have a very good article and booklet on immigration that looks at both what we should do in terms of treating the alien and the sojourner with compassion, but also the whole issue of rule of law. And so it's kind of a point-counterpoint that I thought you might appreciate, and we've posted it so that you can read it and even go back to the original article that kind of surfaced it. And we'll spend some time a little bit later, even this half hour here, talking about immigration because of the attack on one of the ICE facilities. But I thought before we do so, since we did talk about some of the issues of the LGBTQ influence on religious liberty, I thought for just a minute I might read just a short summary of some of the material that Dennis Prager put out, 5 different ways in which these LGBTQ organizations are affecting society. And as you might imagine, as an Orthodox Jew, Dennis Prager agrees with those of us that are Christians that some of this is a real concern. And he points out the fact that there are all sorts of issues that are occupying our attention right now, whether it's Donald Trump, Google, Charlottesville, Russia, impeachment, racism, the trade war with China, which, by the way, we're going to come back to, the Me Too movement, Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, there's just so many things we've been talking about just in the last couple of weeks. But if we could for just a minute, let's kind of hone down on some of the things we talked about with Mike Farris just a minute ago. And if you're taking some notes, you might, number 1 to 5, see if you would agree with the 5 that he mentions. Number 1 is what he says, the LGBTQ dismantling of women's sports. One of the other cases that our friends at ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom, is dealing with is this way in which, primarily in the United States, we've had biological males who identify themselves as females, completely obliterating most of these records and most of these races involving females. So Dennis Prager kind of looks at it internationally and then brings it back to our national example. He says last month a transgender weightlifter won multiple gold medals at the 2019 Pacific Games in Samoa. This individual from New Zealand won 2 gold medals and a silver in 3 heavyweight categories for women weighing more than 87 kilograms or 192 pounds. And this individual is a physical male, but was able to compete as a female in weightlifting. Then Dennis Prager goes on to remind us that, as we've talked about on this program, last year 2 biologically male sophomores at different Connecticut high schools competed in the female division of the state open track and field competition. They came in first and second in both the 100 and then the 200-meter dashes. And you, of course, can go through a very long list. So number 1 is how LGBTQ organizations are sort of dismantling women's sports. Number 2, the dismantling of male and female even at birth. As reported by the Associated Press, quote, parents can choose gender X for newborns. New York City is joining California, Oregon, Washington State in allowing an undesignated gender option on birth certificates. A similar provision takes effect in New Jersey in February. And so, again, he asks the question, what percentage of Americans believe children are lucky if born to parents who will not even identify them at birth as either male or female? And how many of those might be even accused of child abuse? But we'll leave that for another day. So first of all, women's sports. Second of all, just the idea of male and female. Number 3 the dismantling of children's innocence and parental authority. And, of course, that gets us into some of the various sex education programs. The one he uses, since he lives in California, is how California has, quote, overhauled its sex education guidance for public school teachers, encouraging them to talk about gender identity with kindergartners, unquote. Then his has a quote from somebody in the Sacramento area saying, I shouldn't be teaching that stuff. That's for parents to do. But then points out, of course, something we discussed just the other day in terms of the drag queen story hour, which is sort of running across the country now and showing up in various public libraries, and especially urban centers. And then you have even the attempt to speak to that issue being criticized. You might remember the conversation. I think Nick Pitts actually raised it earlier this week, or if it was not this week, it was I think it was actually last week. The TV host Mario Lopez was on with Candace Owens, which, by the way, is produced by PragerU, so he did want to give, of course, a full disclosure there. But Mario Lopez simply said this, and again, this is his quote, if you're 3 years old and you're saying you're feeling a certain way, you think you're a boy or a girl, whatever the case may be, I just think it's dangerous as a parent to make that determination then. Okay, well, then you're going to be a boy or a girl, whatever the case might be. I think parents need to allow their kids to be kids, but at the same time, you got to be an adult in that situation, unquote. Well, his statement, which I think most people in the country would see is common sense, how much would we trust a 3-year-old to know whether they're a boy or a girl, or what it means to be a boy or a girl, male or female anywhere? But, of course, the condemnation that just came down from GLAAD and PFLAG and others caused him to then have to go and recant that, because he was afraid he would lose his TV spot simply because he expressed a little bit of common sense. 2 more real quickly. Number 4, the dismantling of educational norms. CNN reported, and now for our listeners in Illinois, the governor there signed into law a bill that ensures the contributions of LGBTQ people are taught in the public schools. The bill states in public schools only, the teaching of history shall include the study of the roles and contributions of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people in the history of this country and this state. And, of course, the point that he's making is that we should be studying history based on the people that have made true contributions. These could be positive contributions. They could even be negative contributions. But to then say we have to then dig out and find individuals that are identified as sexually alternative and thus focus on them instead of the others that actually have made history is in many ways dismantling the educational norms in this country. And then the final one that he makes, number 5, is how the LGBTQ organizations in many cases are dismantling reality. He points out that the sports editor of The Nation, and by the way, I am familiar with The Nation magazine, but I didn't even know it had a sports editor. That's kind of interesting. But anyway, the sports editor said there is another argument against allowing trans athletes to compete with cisgender athletes that suggests that the presence hurts cis women and cis girls. But this line of thought doesn't acknowledge that trans women are in fact women. And the point he's making is that, wait a minute, no, these are men who now identify as women, but they are not in fact women. Let's use another example. He mentions Ilhan Omar, who in a letter to the USA Powerlifting Organization said, quote, the myth that trans women have a direct competitive advantage is not supported by medical science, unquote. Yes, it is. And it allows people to say things that are just simply not true, simply violate basic common sense. And then one more quote from a person in the National Women's Law Center. There's no research to support the claim that allowing trans athletes to play on teams that fit their gender identity will create a competitive imbalance. And if nothing else, we just illustrated the point. And so anyway, these are 5, if you will, ways that Dennis Prager identifies in a recent column about how LGBTQ organizations are changing society. And I think most of us looking at those would say not for the positive, not for the betterment of some of those institutions, and just a good illustration of why we should pay attention to this LGBTQ agenda that has made its way into society in such dramatic ways. We come back, we're going to kind of set up some of the conversation we're going to have in the next hour on immigration. There has been a shooting at 2 ICE facilities in the state of Texas and in some other places as well. And that is one of the articles we've posted on our website at pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We'll talk more about this issue of immigration right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again in just a few minutes. We're going to spend some time talking about the issue of immigration because of this article that was co-authored by John Zmirak will be with us. And before we do so, let me just mention again, we have a couple of items on our website. First of all, the take action today is to contact your 2 U.S. senators about the Equality Act. We make it very easy. Simply go to pointofview.net. It's in the middle column and click on that. Off on the right-hand side, I might also mention that we have been making available that special report on the Muslim patrol cars in New York City, and we talked about that before, so if you haven't had a chance to get that PDF, it's available to you. And my Viewpoints commentary today is on the Green New Deal. What would the cost of the Green New Deal be? And so if you would like to have that particular article or would like to sign up to receive my daily commentaries, Viewpoints commentaries come to your inbox Monday through Friday. Penna Dexter, who'll be with us tomorrow on our weekend edition. Her commentary, which is weekly, comes to your inbox on Saturday. So some great material there as well. Let me, if I can, cover some stories that simply aren't getting covered. And the first article that we have on our website here talks about the shootings at various ICE facilities. This particular one just on the ones in Texas, but there are others. And if you're not familiar, in San Antonio, 2 ICE facilities were fired upon. The attacks took place in the early morning hours. The FBI is fairly certain that they were targeting the ICE facilities, which stand for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And if you want to get a better perspective on that, there's a summary of kind of the news report out of San Antonio, in which it said investigators say that multiple shots were fired on 2 floors targeting ICE officials. No one was hit, but windows were broken in the building. One person was injured, but it's not clear how they were, though. Then they have a quote from the FBI special agent in charge of that investigation, who said, "I don't think there's a question that they knew which floors the ICE offices were. The building that was shot at had multiple tenants, and it was only focused on those floors where ICE is located." He went on to say, "All of the shots we have found are in the floors where ICE had offices. There's no question that this is a very targeted attack. It's not a secret facility. You can go online. It's out there." So they did some research. They knew what floors ICE was on, and they knew what buildings they were, and they also hit those. Then the field office director for ICE had this to say, in which he was very concerned about the fact that these attacks are due to what he felt were some of the reckless statements being made by some of the politicians, by people in the media and the activists. Here is what Director Daniel Bible says. "This attack on the U.S. Immigration and Custom Enforcement and Removal Operations Field Office in San Antonio is completely without justification. The political rhetoric and misinformation that various politicians, media outlets, and activist groups recklessly disseminate to the American people regarding the ICE mission only serve to further encourage these violent acts. ICE officers," he said, "put their lives on the line each and every day to keep our communities safe. This disturbing public discourse shrouds our critical law enforcement function and unnecessarily puts our officers' safety at risk." At a time when ICE is sometimes referred to as Nazis, when these various detention centers are referred to as concentration camps, words have an impact. And if indeed we should hold the president responsible for the way in which he writes his tweets, we should hold other members of Congress responsible for the kinds of statements they're making there as well. And this, as a story, I just wanted to cover because I first heard about it on talk radio. It's possible that some of the mainstream press eventually covered it, but I couldn't find very much in my limited looking. Maybe they've covered it since then. But these kinds of attacks, and that's just actually one of the ones in the state of Texas, but I posted it just for you to know that some of these words and some of these actions have an impact and are worth mentioning. Here's another story that, we'll give credit where credit is due, did appear in the Washington Post, but this actually is a while ago, but it's, again, one of those pieces of information that doesn't seem to get out to the mainstream public very often. And it is a story that came out a while ago in which it points out that the number of people who became U.S. citizens reached a 5-year high in fiscal year 2018, according to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services report that shows that the U.S. government has maintained the same rate of approving citizenship applications even as the Trump administration is pledged to tighten legal immigration protocols. They go on a little bit later having a quote saying that sometimes immigrant hopefuls and attorneys have been criticizing the agency for longer application wait times since Donald Trump took office. And, if indeed that is the case, that needs to be cleared up. But let's just be honest that if you have been listening to this program for the last almost 2 decades, one of the things we've pointed out is that it sometimes takes entirely too long for a person to come here legally. And there are too many bureaucratic hoops that sometimes people have to jump over. It would be certainly better to streamline this. And so when we talk about immigration reform, as we will with John Zmirak when we come back from the break, we certainly need to do two things. Number one, we need to make legal immigration easier and more efficient. And number two, we need to make illegal immigration more difficult. Of course, that gets into, what kind of border protection takes place, what kind of wall or others which would be built, the other kind of surveillance and the rest. But certainly that is one of the questions that is surfaced there. But I think it is interesting that all the time in which there has been so much criticism of saying we make people wait too long in order to actually become naturalized citizens, this last year, it actually reached a 5-year high. So it is, I think, a reminder that, yes, you can hear some of the rhetoric out on the campaign trail. You can see that sometimes these stories are covered in such a way as you would think that we're not letting anybody come into this country legally, and yet we just, this last year, reached a 5-year high in terms of the number of people that became U.S. citizens. And so we say, welcome to America. And second of all, we say, thank you, Washington Post. At least you did cover that story, because it is relevant to the conversation we're going to have in just a few minutes. One of the articles we posted here is a piece written by John Zmirak, who will be with us, who writes for The Stream. Kelly Kohlberg, who has been on the program with us as well and has been very much involved in some of these activities. And it has 9 things Jesus might do about immigration. It's sort of a counterpoint piece to one that was written before by Esther Cepeda and Michael Gerson. What would Jesus do about immigration issues? So we're going to come back and get into that issue in some detail. John Zmirak will be with us, and if you have some comments or questions or discussion, that will be something that we will do in the next hour as we focus on this issue of immigration. Let me again commend to you, if you want some of the verses and other things related to immigration, this little booklet that I have made available, A Biblical View on Immigration, kind of deals with both the issue of course, government and the rule of law, as well as compassion towards aliens and immigrants, and then has a section in it as well about additional biblical principles that might be relevant to a discussion about immigration. And so we'll have John Zmirak kind of lead us through his particular essay, and it's available on our website, pointofview.net. As you go there, please also take the time to click on that button that says Take Action. That's your assignment for today, and I hope that every one of you will take the time to contact your 2 senators about the Equality Act, the issue we discussed earlier with Michael Farris. Let's take a break. We'll come back and spend some time with John Zmirak looking at how he thinks Jesus would address this issue of immigration. It'll be an interesting conversation. We'll have that right after these important messages.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
So we're going to talk about how Jesus would handle the issue of immigration. You might say, why are we framing it that way? Because that's the way it's been framed by a couple of columns that have come out. A number of months ago, Esther Cepeda, writing in the Washington Post, actually wrote a column, What Would Jesus Do About Immigration Issues? And also journalist Michael Gerson has kind of followed along in that regard. And so more recently, John Zmirak, who's on the phone with us today, and Kelly Kohlberg, who's been in the program with us as well, talked about 9 things Jesus might do about immigration. So I thought it would be a helpful discussion about this issue of immigration, especially how to apply biblical principles. I've mentioned my booklet on a biblical view on immigration. Of course, we've talked with John in the past about his book on that subject. And so this is just an opportunity to hear from him and some of the points that he makes. John Zmirak, if you're not familiar, has been on the program with us before, senior editor at The Stream, author of the Politically Incorrect Guide to a number of issues that we have talked about, including this topic as well, and an individual that graduated from Yale University. As a matter of fact, he and Eric Metaxas were in the same class together, but back then Eric was not a Christian, and later said, everything John was saying in class, I now agree with. Also has an MFA as well as PhD from Louisiana State University, an individual that has written for a number of different magazines, and also an individual that, as I said before, is the senior editor of The Stream. So, John, welcome back to Point of View.
Thank you. And yeah, the name of the book is The Politically Incorrect Guide to Immigration, and about a third of it deals with religious arguments on the subject, because I co-wrote it with Al Perota. He's an evangelical, I'm a Catholic, and both our churches are struggling to deal intelligently, rationally, and biblically with this question. If you like, we could go through, but there are 9 points here. Do you want to go through them one at a time?
That was my plan. And again, I have posted this article for people to read so that they can interact with it. It will be about 4 pages to print out. But the first one you talked about is stand and lead. And I think that was interesting, because one of the concerns, even before we get into it, was that oftentimes when people talk about what would Jesus do, and first of all, I do roll my eyes, when I see things like Jesus would never drive an SUV. Really, that's so out of cultural context and not even make sense. But when people,
I always tell people, if you want to know what Jesus would do, he would raise the dead, he would cleanse the temple. He would rebuke the Pharisees. Not everything Jesus did is appropriate to us, because he was the Son of God and the Messiah. And we don't get to stand up and say, Moses said unto you X, but I say unto you Y. So, the standard of what Jesus would do is not, it's not as easy to apply as you think.
So again, with that disclaimer, let's work our way through the 9, because we have some 9, and we'll keep you here as long as we have to. And if you want to ask a question, fine. But first of all, stand and lead. What do you mean by that?
Okay, we only apply what would Jesus do to Americans, but you know what? The immigrants are human beings too, and most of them are Christians. What would Jesus do if he were an impoverished country? Would he leave his wife and kids behind? If he were, a married man, would a married man leave his wife and kids behind and go work hundreds of miles away, leaving the sons to grow up without fathers while sending them thousands of dollars? Because that's what's happening. 1 out of 3 El Salvadorans, 1 out of 3 now lives in the United States. Whole villages in Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Mexico have been stripped of the men. They're all up in America working illegally in dangerous conditions for subpar wages. If they get hurt, they just get sent to an emergency ward. They have no insurance, no protection. They can be fired. They can be deported. Meanwhile, they're sending money home to their families. So their kids, the boys, are growing up without fathers, but with lots of material goods streaming down and Facebook pages talking about how wonderful it is in America, and it's all material. They're getting material gifts from their fathers, but they're not having fathers. We as Americans are stripping Central America of its fathers in order to enjoy the fruits of the cheap labor. And the Democrats are doing it in the hope that they'll get voters, that the fathers will bring the rest of their families in, and then they'll be Democrat voters. That's not the best thing for Central America. And if we enable that because it's in the financial interest of a few corporations, we're culpable for that. So I'm not sure Jesus would say, strip off all the fathers from whole countries and send them to America and leave the boys to grow up without guidance. I don't think that that's particularly a Christian approach.
Second one you point out is clean up crime, because, again, you talk about cleaning up cleanse the temple. So, again, you apply that principle. How so?
Well, because of open borders and legal loopholes, 94% of the heroin in the United States, 94% comes through the southern border. 70,000 Americans have died from drug overdoses in just 2018. Many Middle Eastern jihadis and MS-13 gang members came in through our broken border and are now embedded in our cities. There are MS-13 chapters in 10 American cities. We have to remember, large parts of Mexico are controlled by drug cartels. The border crossings, the illegal border crossings, are controlled by drug cartels that are now human traffickers, and they charge migrants $5,000 each to get across. And they encourage them to bring children with them as a Get Into America free card. And in 1 out of 3 cases, it's not, according to what we found when we checked, 1 out of 3 of those kids is not even the child of the parents who are claiming him. He's just somebody they grabbed off the street or they bought from human traffickers, because if you show up and you have a kid and you say you want asylum, our stupid laws say you have to be let in.
Yes, and one more I want to put on the table, and then we'll take a break and then come back and get into some others. The idea of compassion and fairness. Now, that's one that you do hear quite a bit, and, of course, that was part of the Esther Cepeda article about what would Jesus do about immigration issues, but you give it a little bit different take, don't you?
Yeah. There are tens of thousands of people applying legally to come into America, waiting patiently in line. Illegal immigrants are just cutting the line. I don't think Jesus affirms that as selfishly cutting the line because you think your claim is more important than other people's.
So, again, some very important principles here that we have. And one of the reasons you wrote that is because you were just feeling that in some respects, this particular column, which you mentioned in your article and others, only kind of looks at one issue. And so when we come back from the break, we need to talk about this idea of taking the whole counsel of God and the whole counsel of Scripture. So we'll get into that. And then we have a couple of other very important principles there as well that are going to be very important in terms of what is happening in the political arena. How do we actually address the issue of who are our neighbors and how to reach out, and even one section here on calling out the Sadducees. We'll talk about that as well. So we'll get into kind of the biblical interpretations in just a minute. And so if you would like to join the conversation, the number is 1-800-351-1212. Posted this article that came out a while back on 9 things Jesus might do about immigration. Again, it is responding in part to a previous one as well that came out in the Washington Post. What would Jesus do about immigration issues? And since we've had these kind of conversations in the past, I thought it'd be a very good, helpful exercise to work our way through 9. We've only looked at 3, so we'll try to get a few more in the next segment. And then, of course, open it up for your comments or questions. How do we think about this very controversial issue of immigration from a biblical point of view? John Zmirak will lead us through a few more of his comments right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
As As I mentioned earlier this week, the Democratic presidential candidates disagree on a number of key issues, but there is one issue where there is unanimity. All of these Democrats want you to pay for abortions. That is the argument Alexander DeSantis makes in a recent column. There may be some disagreement among the candidates about whether to implement Medicare for all. There's even some disagreement about which plans actually qualify as Medicare for all. But all of these plans being put forward assume that the federal government should cover abortion. She says even as Democratic candidates try to distinguish themselves on health care, all of them who have opined on the topic support a national health care program that would finance every woman's abortion at any stage of pregnancy and for any reason. American voters should pay attention to that last point. These candidates want abortion legal from conception to pregnancy for any reason or no reason at all. I sometimes have a caller to my radio program arguing that we should find a middle ground and establish a common sense compromise on abortion. Of course, if you believe that there is human life in the womb, you can't really compromise on that. But even so, let me ask you, where is the middle ground? If you believe abortion should be legal for all 9 months, and you believe that all American taxpayers should pay for it, where is the potential for compromise? Before I close, let me explain one issue. Rarely do these candidates or these plans use the word abortion. Instead, they talk about comprehensive reproductive care or how their plan will guarantee a woman's right to choose. I think we all know what that means and how judges and bureaucrats will interpret such language in the law. It means fully funded abortions that you will have to pay for. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Affirm Films and the Kendrick Brothers, Overcomer, starring Alex Kendrick and Priscilla Shire, rated PG, in theaters August 23rd. Overcomermovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
John Zmirak with us. He is the senior editor of The Stream, author of The Politically Incorrect Guide to Immigration, and, of course, the author of this one with Kelly Kohlberg on 9 things Jesus might do about immigration. We've looked at the first 3, but I wanted to focus some time and attention now, John, on number 4, take the whole counsel of Scripture, because you actually take us through some of the words that are used and also help us understand a little bit more about how to think about immigration from a biblical point of view. So what do we need to know there? Because sometimes, as I have pointed out, we want to sometimes cherry pick certain verses. So take it away.
That's right. That's right. I mean, you could just you could go through the Bible and say, here it says salt is good. So no, doctor, I am not going to lower my salt intake. I don't care what you're saying as my cardiologist, because it says in the Bible salt is good. That is the level of cherry picking that's being employed by open borders advocates. They're simply saying, "Oh, it says welcome the stranger," and that's it. That's an absolute fundamentalist thing. You know, I'm pulling that out, and you can't interpret it. You can't put it in context. You can't do any etymology. Nope, it just says that, and I'm going to be an absolute fundamentalist about it. Well, no. Kelly Kohlberg did a great little ebook called Wise Welcome, and I recommend people look it up. Wise Welcome. It's a free ebook, and it goes into all this. For instance, when it says welcome the stranger in the Old Testament, you know, that wasn't written in English, right? It was written in Hebrew. And the word that is used for the stranger you're supposed to welcome is ger, G-E-R. What that means is resident alien. It's a foreign person who came lawfully with the permission of the Jewish kingdom. And it's really close to the word convert. It's the word used for Ruth, who said, "Your God shall be my God, and your people shall be my people." when it says welcome the stranger, it means basically almost converts to Judaism, non-Jews who are willing to respect the Jewish law and live by it. They're not worshiping idols. They're not slaughtering pigs. They're not engaging in acts that violate the natural law. They're obeying the law of Israel. So that would be very close to saying, welcome the legal immigrant, the one who follows the process. There are two other words that we see in the Old Testament: zar, Z-A-R, and nekhar, N-E-K-H-A-R. Those are the words for foreigners and strangers. And it means something like a squatter or a temporary worker, a traveler, or an invading enemy. Progressive Christians pretend that all foreigners are ger, but in fact, different words are used in different contexts in the Old Testament. Here are a few Bible verses that you never hear the open borders people quote. Isaiah 1:7. Your country is desolate. Your cities burned with fire. Your fields are being stripped by foreigners. Right before you, laid waste as when overthrown by strangers. And Lamentations 5:2. Our inheritance has been turned over to strangers, our homes to foreigners. These are not presented as positive outcomes. These are punishments for sin. The Bible is not saying you have to turn your country over to people who want to impose Sharia law, or people who want to vote in socialism, people who want to support abortion. And unfortunately, according to the Pew Research, 80% of Latino immigrants support bigger government and essentially the Democratic Party. And in the last 20 years, when immigrants have become more and more a percentage of the Democratic Party, the people like Karl Rove and George W. Bush, who said, when Latinos come, they'll be pro-life, they'll be pro-family because they're Catholic. No. The Democratic Party in the last 20 years, as immigrants, especially from Latin America, have become like a large part of their voting base, it's become more pro-abortion. 20 years ago, they were pro-life Democrats. Where are they now? You can't even run for dog catcher in the Democratic Party if you're not pro-abortion. Some of the leading pro-abortion politicians in California are themselves Latino immigrants or the sons of immigrants. Javier Becerra, the Attorney General of the state, he's Hispanic. I think he's an immigrant himself. He is trying to put David DeLayton in prison for exposing Planned Parenthood. There is absolutely zero evidence that Latino immigrants have done anything for the pro-life cause. If anything, they've made it worse. So, if you don't want the values that people bring with you from their foreign country, you don't have to let them in, because then your inheritance is being turned over to strangers and your home to foreigners. And in Nehemiah 2:7, it talks about how important walls and borders are. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. Build the wall. Building a wall sometimes makes sense. So that's point 4. You want to go on to point 5, or do you need to take a break?
No, I think you've done a good job there. And again, I would think for some people saying that came really fast and furious, because this goes on for over a page. So if people wanted to go back and look at some of that in terms of the Hebrew, in terms of the context, that's there. But number 5, you talk about see-through dirty politics. What about that?
That's right. Well, international globalists like George Soros are pouring money into liberal evangelical outlets like the magazine Sojourners. We know a lot of this from WikiLeaks, that George Soros' organization actually had a term. They called it Rent an Evangelical. When they wanted to promote open borders, they would find some evangelical who needed money, and they would recruit him to quote these Bible verses and make it sound like every Christian has to support open borders, and they would pay him tens of thousands of dollars. All of this is on the public record. If you look at the WikiLeaks revelations about George Soros and his organizations, groups like the Evangelical Immigration Table are 100% Soros funded. They're basically puppets for someone, George Soros, who is one of the most radically pro-abortion, anti-Israel, anti-American, anti-free market, pro-LGBT activism. He's the biggest funder of all those causes around the world, and he just happens to want open borders too. Is that just an accident?
Yes. What about some of these others, like the idea of rendering unto Caesar? Because a lot of the focus is usually on compassion, but we also need to obey the law, don't we?
That's right. If there's one thing besides he said render it to Caesar. He was talking about paying taxes. He pointed out that Caesar minted the coins and that the government legitimately taxes us and controls the currency. Well, what's another thing the government legitimately does? It controls the border. It controls the movement of foreign people in and out of the border. If you're going to say that the government can't control the border of its territory, it's not a government. One of the reasons we couldn't control Iraq was we couldn't control its borders. We can't control the borders of Afghanistan. That's why they're failed states. If you don't want America to be a failed state, it needs to have a border. As Ronald Reagan said, a country without a border really isn't a country at all. So if you're going to respect the law, you're going to have to respect the country's right and duty to control its borders. And if you're smuggling people across the border, as the Catholic Bishop of El Paso was doing, you don't deserve praise as a noble Christian. You deserve to be in prison.
Well, we're going to take a break, and let me just see if I can keep you over, because we have a couple of other points that you have made. But let me, if we can, check on that and also give you a chance if you would like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. A lot of this was precipitated by a piece that appeared in the Washington Post about what would Jesus do about immigration issues, and also some of the various statements that have been made by various individuals. Of course, we've had even more recently some people that have been on the program that have been to the border, helped us understand what is or isn't happening there and the way in which it's being covered by the press. But we thought this one would be helpful, if for no other reason than to help you maybe think through a little more deeply about these issues, about how to apply some of these biblical principles. And in particular, like I said, the section that about the whole counsel of Scripture really spends a fair amount of time going into the distinctions that maybe aren't as evident when we read the Old Testament in the English, but the distinctions certainly in the Hebrew between ger, which is the resident alien, and zar and nikar, which mean foreigners and strangers, and then to actually go and find the various verses that are appropriate in that regard. But we have a couple other points that we need to make. Since there are 9 points, we've skipped 1 or 2 along the way. We'll see if we can finish those off. But if you'd like to join us in this last half hour, 1-800-351-1212. If you say, look, I got to read this for myself, well, the good news is, first of all, you can go to the stream at any time and find this. But I thought this one in particular would be helpful, so we've posted it on our website, pointofview.net. Then you can even follow the link to the previous article if you'd like to read that as almost a point counterpoint to give you some great information that you can then apply. And for those of you that are pastors and maybe have members of your congregation saying, how are we supposed to think about this issue of immigration? I've put together a little booklet on this, but this article here would be very helpful to you as well. So I hope you'll take the time to go to pointofview.net and print it out and maybe pass it on to some others. Maybe even put it on your Facebook page and to send it out in a Twitter feed. So let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with John Zmirak right after these important messages.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Privileged to have with us for just a little bit longer John Zmirak, senior editor of The Stream, but we'll also take some phone calls along the way. So let's head to South Carolina first, WLPG. Hugh, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
I appreciate it. I appreciate the emphasis that Mr. Zmirak, if I've got the last name right,
yes,
made on etymology, the study of certain words and the significance of those different words in different contexts. And I think it's important for those who appeal to passages, selected passages from the Old Testament, should remember that when God gave the land of Israel the land to his people, he identified it by specific boundaries. And though that area is, I guess, much too large to wall in, he honors the boundaries, and he will fulfill that in time. And it's been pointed out, Jerusalem had walls. The New Jerusalem is going to have walls. Walls are there for reasons, and people have walls around their homes and their compounds even today. Walls have value when appropriately and strategically placed.
Well, and I was thinking, John, one of the points you make here is in Acts 17 about the idea that they have appointed times and the boundaries of their habitation. And, of course, you have some other examples of boundaries in the Scriptures. So it seems to me, and, of course, you already talked about the issue of walls. I think Hugh's just kind of setting up another point that you made in your article.
That's right. I mean, people who say, we must build bridges, not walls. I mean, as Pope Francis said, that is the emptiest and most foolish and rash of rhetoric. And people, after the Pope said that, they showed all the walls surrounding the Vatican. And they also pointed out that Vatican citizenship is the most exclusive on earth. There are fewer than 200 Vatican citizens. And it's impossible to get it. If someone sneaks into St. Peter's Basilica and spends the night there, they can't claim squatters' rights or asylum and get Vatican citizenship. They can't. The gypsies of Rome can't flood into the Vatican, claim citizenship, and then demand the right to vote and to redistribute the wealth of the Vatican because they're now a Democratic majority. That's essentially what Catholic leaders in America are saying Latin Americans have the right to do. They have the right to flood into the United States in unlimited numbers. Then their children will have birthright citizenship. They will get citizenship, and they have the right to vote themselves welfare programs and redistribute the wealth that was accumulated before they showed up. That's just anarchy, and it's totally unbiblical.
One of the articles, points in your article, I guess a better way to say it, is this idea of showing love to actual neighbors. You know, you hear, John, lots of times, well, we should love our neighbors, but you put the word actual neighbors because you've got another point that you want to make.
That's right. Most of the jobs done by illegal immigrants would be done by native-born Americans at higher wages. Illegal immigration is a way for employers to never have to hire a black American or a native-born Latino American again because they can get somebody cheaper, somebody docile because he's afraid of being deported, somebody who will follow orders and not call the government if there's a safety violation. It undermines all the labor and safety laws that labor unions fought in the late 19th century to create. So it's no surprise that cheap labor companies like that chicken factory in Mississippi, they want to flood the country with illegal immigrants so they can make money. And if those people get injured, they go to the emergency ward and the taxpayer takes care of it. How are legitimate, honest businesses that hire American citizens at legal wages and abide by safety regulations, how are they supposed to compete with companies that are flouting the law and getting away with it? That's not good to our native workers. You know, for 40 years, the working class wage, the average working class wage was frozen. We had 40 years without a pay raise for the native-born working class. It happened at the exact same time that the huge wave of post-1965 immigration happened. That's not an accident.
Let's take another phone call. We'll go to Maria in Texas. Maria, what's your point of view?
Oh, my goodness. I couldn't agree more with the individual you're interviewing. It is out of control. I have worked the border. I'm a physician. I have worked that border, and those numbers of individuals coming across expecting 100% medical care, it's over the top. It's dangerous. It's a health hazard for everyone involved, including the people in the surrounding cities and the people that are supposed to be taking care of these folks, the CBP officers, the regular police department, the physicians and the ERs. No one in this country understands the sheer magnitude of the numbers of individuals showing up at the border with their hands held just out for what have you got to give me? And on top of all that, it's human trafficking. Some of those kids, this isn't their first time processing into the country. They come in with one adult. They say the adult is their relative, their father or their mother. Children, because of our laws in this country, they're not fingerprinted, they're not identified. And so the kid gets processed in, brings an adult. The next week, the next month, the kid's back doing it again with a different adult. And you wonder, how are you doing this? You interview these kids and you're like, why have I seen you before? Why are you here again? Right. And the child will tell you it's a job. They get paid by, the people that are in trafficking on the other side of the border that are paying people to move people into this country. It is a travesty. We need to close the border, period. And you know what? It's ridiculous that we've set ourselves up to create this mess. It's Congress that hasn't done their job.
Yes.
We have laws. We have regulations.
Okay, John, let me give you a chance to jump in here just before we run out of time.
Yep. You know who else is at fault? Catholic bishops. My own Catholic bishops, 40% of the income the Catholic bishops get is from U.S. government contracts for nonprofits. Most of that is serving immigrants. So the U.S. bishops' bottom line is 40% at stake here. All their charities, all the salaries they pay, their whole organization, plus 40% of American Catholics leave the church. And the only way they can keep the pews filled is with immigrants who then pretty quickly leave as well. So I blame my own church's leadership. And any time you hear a Catholic bishop talking about this, ask him, where's the money coming from for your nonprofits to serve these immigrants? 98% of the money the U.S. bishops spent on refugees was federal money. 98%. That's not Christian charity. That's being a federal contractor, just like Planned Parenthood.
Wow. One other point, it's your final point here, the idea of preach to all nations, and that is certainly, of course, the Great Commission in Matthew 28 and other passages. And if nothing else, I think we should encourage people to actually build Christ-honoring cultures in Latin America rather than to escape from them. Well, of course, that gets into foreign policy. It gets to evangelism and all the rest. But what are some final words you might give to us just before I let you go?
Well, I think churches should be dealing with immigration by evangelizing the immigrants who come in legally and making sure that they're full Christians, that they vote pro-life, that they have pro-family views, that they know their responsibilities as citizens. That's what the churches used to do with immigrants. They used to constantly try to Americanize them, teach them English, teach them the Constitution, encourage good work habits in them, help them to be good citizens. That's not what most of the churches are doing now.
John, I appreciate you taking the time to write this. Of course, we've had Kelly in studio. We've had you in studio. We need to get you in studio again, but I know you're a busy man. But I appreciate the good work that you do there in this stream. And I might just mention that not only do we have the article there for people to read and to print out, but we also have a link to the stream because I think it's just a great resource. Every single day we find great articles that are out there that you are writing and others are writing. So thank you for the work that you've done over these years to actually help us think biblically about these various issues. And I look forward to the next opportunity.
Thank you. Have a great day.
John Zmirak with us. And again, if you find yourself saying, okay, that went too fast, I think we covered 8 of the 9, but we gave you a pretty good idea of 9 things Jesus might do about immigration. And he really brings some facts and figures to the table, in large part because of having written a book on the subject of immigration and having done some very extensive research. And then Kelly Kohlberg, who has actually been kind of searching out, if you're not familiar with her, we'll get her back on the studio if we can. She's actually been tracing out some of the George Soros money over the years. And so that's kind of something that she brings to the table, plus has written that piece, which you can find more about on this as well, on just the different uses of those words, because if you really want to try to understand what even is called for in the Old Testament, and let's recognize that the Old Testament theocracy is different than a 21st century pluralistic culture in America, but if you want to at least try to draw out biblical principles, you need to understand a little bit more about some of those different words that are in the Hebrew and some of the context in which they surface in, well, for example, in Deuteronomy and in Isaiah and Lamentations, Nehemiah, and a couple of other passages. So this is a resource we wanted to make available to you, and it's available on our website, pointofview.net. And if you want to post it, we've made it easy for you to put on your Facebook page and start a conversation, or to feed it on a Twitter post and to get some conversation on that as well. When we come back, I have some final comments. We've learned a little bit more about a couple of issues that we've been talking about here on Point of View. And as a program out, don't forget that tomorrow is our weekend edition. Penna Dexter and Lathan Watts will be with us, but I have a few more comments to make right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and if you would like to join us, 1-800-351-1212, or I might just move on to a couple other topics. My Viewpoints commentary, let's get to that, is on the website, pointofview.net, and it's about the cost of the Green New Deal, and we've talked about that before. If you look at some of the costs, they're pretty significant, and I'll cut to the chase, as we did the other day when we were trying to talk about the various costs to various states. But I love what Dr. Merle Matthews said. Well, it's real simple. Let me just say it's real simple. It would cost more than the annual income for a typical American family. 4 of these 5 states that they analyzed would actually have to pay an additional $70,000 in the first year of implementation. In Alaska, it'd be over $100,000. So you could see real quickly that, first of all, it's very expensive. Also, it'd be very complex, and most importantly, as I've tried to point out in other programs and other commentaries, it wouldn't be very effective either. So all of that money being spent itself would simply not have the kind of impact that we would expect. And that brings me to a piece that I will mention now and then wait to discuss in more detail the next time we have Dr. Merle Matthews on. Lots of times he joins us on a Friday roundtable. He won't be with us this time, but he points out that in his recent piece here, is global cooling on the way? You know, what? Now, if you have been around for a while, and I'm the old guy around the table, there was a time when at the end of the 1970s, there was still a little bit of a concern that we might have global cooling. I remember when I was in graduate school, there were some talking about the possibility that we'd have global cooling. And that at the same time we saw carbon dioxide increasing, so we might have global warming. And one of my professors suggested maybe the two would offset each other. Well, there are at least some climatologists now that are starting to say maybe we're actually heading for a cooling because of things that have nothing to do with this planet, but have everything to do with solar cycles and a variety of other issues. Now, the people that are making these statements, interesting enough, in China. So, again, take it for what it's worth. But this particular story that appeared in, I believe it was the Washington Post, studied northern China for 12 years, concluded that winters in northern China may have been warming since about 4000 BC. But then they said driving forces include the sun, the atmosphere, the interaction with the ocean. We have detected no evidence of human influence, which, of course, makes sense if you think about it, because as Dr. Merle Matthews points out, no one claims that human-caused carbon dioxide emissions had any impact thousands of years ago, even hundreds of years ago. But he says there's more. The authors point out that warming isn't continuous. There have been long cold spells. And if you're not familiar, we had a very warm period in the past during what was called the medieval warming period. Now, you go back all the way, there was a Roman warming period, but more recently, and I mean that in a sense of the last millennia, we had the medieval warming period from about 900 AD to about 1300 AD that has been really followed by what was called a Little Ice Age, which happened primarily from about AD 1500 to 1850. Well, there is some possibility now in looking at some of these models, we might be headed for another what might be called Little Ice Age because we have climate models that didn't predict this kind of warming hiatus that's taken place since 1998 to 2013. So if nothing else, there are some that are suggesting that we might not be headed for global warming. We might be headed for global cooling. And so I just thought we'd put that one on the table as a conversation to have in the future. But before we go, let me also mention that my commentary yesterday dealt with how many of these people that are running for the presidency, this would be Senator Bernie Sanders and Senator Elizabeth Warren and others, are promoting Medicare for all, and in that are promoting that you would pay for abortion. But today, our friends at the Wall Street Journal point out something else, and that is the subtitle of this is Bernie Sanders wants taxpayers to save hospitals after he bankrupts them. And it turns out that Senator Bernie Sanders, last month suggested a $20 billion federal bailout for struggling hospitals. He announced the plan in Philadelphia where you have a hospital right now that's in bankruptcy. And his argument is the reason the hospital's in bankruptcy is due to the greed perpetrated by a private equity firm. The editors of the Wall Street Journal say, can we point out something else? Because in a letter to the Department of Health and Human Services, members of the delegation from Pennsylvania in Congress point out that 2/3 of the patients in this hospital are on government insurance, either Medicare or Medicaid. Now, if you have listened to this program any length of time at all, you know that even when we've had other guests, but certainly when we've had Dr. Merrill Matthews in here, we point out that Medicare and Medicaid do not pay hospitals the cost for what it takes to treat a patient. The best estimates are in the 87% range, sometimes lower even in places like New York City. So they don't even cover the cost that the hospital incurs in treating those patients. So how do they deal with that? Well, they transfer and shift the cost to private insurers, sometimes which pay up to 140% of the cost, according to data from the American Hospital Association. If you've ever gotten a bill for that, you see, I know cotton balls don't cost us that much. I know that bottle of water didn't cost that much. I know that blood work probably didn't cost that much, because they're transferring those costs to you and your insurance company. And so as a result, the American Medical Association, in its latest journal of the AMA, published estimates that said that Medicare rates would, if indeed were used universally, would mean $150 billion a year in lost revenue just for community hospitals alone. And that brings us back to the counterpoint that took place in the last Democratic debate. You might remember former Congressman John Delaney and Member of Congress John Delaney in the June Democratic debate actually criticized Bernie Sanders and Medicare for All because he said, quote, this is John Delaney saying this, if you go to every hospital in this country and you ask them one question, which is, how would it have been for you last year if every one of your bills, I should say, was paid at the Medicare rate? And he said every single hospital administrator said we would close. So in some respects, this attempt by Senator Bernie Sanders to put together the idea of a federal bailout fund for hospitals is, in a sense, maybe even a tacit admission that if indeed we do get Medicare for all the hospitals would go bankrupt. And that's why the editors of the Wall Street Journal say that Bernie Sanders wants taxpayers to save hospitals after he bankrupts them. Interesting article. We may get into it again when we have one of our healthcare experts on the program. But tomorrow, hope you'll take the time to join us, because we're going to spend some time in the 2 hours we're together with you talking about some of these issues in the news. For those of you that like to tune in an hour earlier, I'm actually going to do something on the whole question of whether or not there are contradictions in the Bible, in light of the fact that one of the top singers for Hillsong has said, you know, we have all these contradictions in the Bible and nobody's talking about it. Well, I will be tomorrow on the first hour before we go on the national hour. And if you want to listen in or watch on Facebook Live, we'll cover some of that as well. If you need some of the material we've covered on the website today, it's all available to you. We encourage you to take action. And I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Hope you'll join us tomorrow right here on Point of View.
From Affirm Films, Provident Films, and the Kendrick Brothers comes Overcomer. John Harrison is a frustrated coach questioning his value until he crosses paths with a student struggling on her own journey.
What have you allowed to define you? When you find your identity in the one who created you, it'll change your whole perspective.
Overcomer, starring Alex Kendrick and Priscilla Shirer. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. In theaters August 23rd. More information is available at overcomermovie.com.
It's been said that a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. That was definitely true in the 19th century when preacher Charles Spurgeon said it. But here in the 21st century, truth can be just as fast. Think about it. When Point of View presents the truth, it reaches people across America and around the world instantly. You make that instant truth a reality when you join the Point of View Radio Truth Team. Get all the details now at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team. and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I've recently